Good morning. Welcome to the First Unitarian Universalist Congregation of Ann Arbor, Michigan. I am the Reverend Cassandra Hartley, and I have the honor of serving this congregation as executive minister. I'm joined today by the Reverend Theresa Rohlck, our director of the wonderful Chalice Bells, and our Congregational Chaplain, the Chalice Bells themselves, who are offering us the gift of music this morning, along with Julie Tanguay and Dina Shields, who will also be offering some more music later. I'm joined by Carter Smith, the director of all these wonderful music ministries, Allison Halerz, our Pianist-in-Residence, and Mike Halerz, our technology consultant. I was telling the first service, he likes to hide back there as quietly as possible, but we have to embarrass him every once in a while. Of course, we're also joined by the countless staff and volunteers throughout the building who make our Sunday mornings possible. If you're new to our congregation, we are so grateful for the gift of your time and your presence. If you'd like to learn more about our community, you can join us for a special newcomer welcome directly after service. It's in the small chapel just past the social hall. You'll see a sign there that says, "Newcomers, welcome." And it's a chance for you to meet congregants and staff, ask questions, and of course, have some coffee and donuts. If you're not new to our community, thank you for coming back and for offering the gift of your time and presence. I can't tell you what it means to be in this multimodal phase where we can gather together in this space in person again. But we can also gather online with community members throughout Michigan, throughout the country, and as you'll hear in just a little bit, even throughout the world. One of the ways that we can make this in-person gathering safe and possible is to follow our safety precautions, which includes wearing a mask both inside and outside, except when we're actively eating or drinking. We know that everyone has different levels of comfort and different health and safety needs, so thank you for honoring our mask policy as an act of compassion for one another. Also, even though it's extremely hard to have this policy in a congregation so dedicated to music, thank you for not singing. We hope to continue experimenting with different ways to engage with music safely and to continue our long history of musical excellence. One of the ways that we can all do this together is by actively engaging with our interim music consultant, Bailey Whiteman. Bailey is working with our congregation throughout this next year, helping us to process what our music ministries have meant to us and what we want to build together as we move toward hiring a permanent director of music ministries. You can meet and talk with Bailey on Zoom this Wednesday from 7 to 9 p.m. And she will also be visiting with us in person October 22nd through the 24th to engage in a series of listening sessions with various groups and people. So please check all of our communication platforms, the website, the weekly news, social media, for more information about how you can join us for Zoom and those various events. And also, please join us again on October 24th here in worship as Bailey and Reverend Manish lead us in understanding more about the interim music process. As we move deeper into today's time of worship, I want to note that this coming Monday, we will celebrate Indigenous Peoples Day. There are resources and ideas for honoring this important day on our website and more in social media coming. But I also want to begin our time together with a poem by Joy Harjo, an internationally renowned writer of the Muskogee Nation who is serving her second term as the 23rd Poet Laureate of the United States. Her poem captures our monthly theme of relationships and our exploration today of the meaning of belonging so perfectly. It's called The Life of Beauty. The sung blessing of creation led her into the human story. That was the first beauty. Next beauty was the sound of her mother's voice rippling the waters beneath the drumming skin of her birthing cocoon. Next, beauty, the father, with kindness in his hands as he held the newborn against his breathing. Next, beauty, the moon through the dark window. It was a rocking horse, a wish. There were many beauties in this age, for everything was immensely itself. Green, greener than the impossibility of green. The taste of wind after its slide through dewgrass at dawn, or language running through a tangle of wordlessness in her mouth. She ate well of the next beauty. Next beauty planted itself urgently beneath the warrior shrines. Next was beauty beaded by her mother and pinned neatly to hold back her hair. Then how tendrils of fire longing grew into her, beautiful the flower between her legs as she became herself. Do not forget this beauty, she was told. The story took her far away from beauty. In the tests of her living, beauty was often long from the reach of her mind and spirit. When she forgot beauty, all was brutal. But beauty always came to lift her up, to stand again. When it was beautiful all around and within, she knew herself to be corn plant, moon, and sunrise. Death is beautiful, she sang, as she left this story behind her. Even her bones, said time, were turned to beauty. We are gathered for worship.
Good morning. Throughout this pandemic, we continued to light a chalice every week, a constant reminder of our connections with each other. Our chalice lighting ritual reminds us that there is a spark of the divine within each of us, and that in our gathering, that spark burns brighter and truer. Today, Diane Downer is going to help us light our chalice. We're going to light it here in the sanctuary, but you may have a chalice if you are watching at home. You could light yours along with us as we say together our chalice lighting words. We light this chalice for the light of truth. We light this chalice for the warmth of love. We light this chalice for the energy of action. We light this chalice for the harmony of peace. Thank you, Diane. The words of our covenant bind us together not because we profess one single belief or creed, but because we agree to be in right relationship with each other. Speaking our covenant together helped maintain the sense of belonging to a community over the months that we were not physically in each other's presence. But even now, by speaking these words together, we combine the voices of those present here and of those watching from somewhere else to remind us of the promises we make to each other and that we do belong to what we aspire to call the beloved community. Will you say with me the words of our covenant? The spirit of this church is love, and service is its law. This is our covenant with each other, to dwell together in peace, to search for truth in love, and to help one another. And now I would like to introduce one of UUAA's newest members, Reagan Martin, who is currently a PhD student through the University of Michigan in the history of art. Reagan signed his certificate of membership about a year ago in November of 2020 from London, England, where he has been living while doing his research. He was in town briefly in July of 2021, and he came in to sign the membership book in person. So please welcome Reagan back to UUAA via video recorded in London. Welcome, Reagan.
Good morning. I'm Reagan Martin. I'm a PhD candidate at the University of Michigan, and for the last 2 years, I've been researching and writing my dissertation from London, England. I was still searching for a Unitarian congregation in London when everything moved online in 2020. So rather than try and connect with an unfamiliar community online just because it happened to be in London, I decided I'd rather worship virtually with the First Unitarian Universalist Congregation of Ann Arbor. Although I had been present quite regularly when living in Ann Arbor, it was an under-the-radar kind of participation in which I rarely entered the social hall and shied away from volunteering. At first, the pandemic move to online worship was ideal for this kind of stealth attendance, especially from across the Atlantic. But the loneliness of being a single person living in a 200 square foot studio in severe lockdown began to weigh on me. I realized I had a unique opportunity to take a more active role in this special community. So when the membership introduction classes came around, I stepped out of the shadows. During the class, I confessed my previously stealthy ways to Hannah Hotchkiss, and she kindly suggested that I should not feel guilty in the least, and that I should do what feeds my soul. If that level of participation was what I could manage, it was perfectly all right. Oh, I was so relieved. But also, I knew I was ready to grow in my chosen faith and to contribute to this beloved community. As part of the membership class, I was asked to consider what my gifts might be and how I could translate those into acts of service. The distance between London and Ann Arbor that had been bridged by YouTube and Zoom suddenly felt much greater. How could I contribute anything from so far away? Fortunately, it was my familiarity with those very digital tools that allowed me to contribute by occasionally facilitating our virtual social hour or acting as a discussion host. It was a big step from the back pew in Ann Arbor to demanding that people raise their physical or virtual hands to be placed in the correct breakout room. But it turned out to be an even bigger blessing. Each Sunday, from my teeny tiny apartment, I felt embraced by a vast community, and for that I am deeply grateful. At the conclusion of the membership classes, after the first ever virtual membership signing, I had a choice to make as to whether I would also contribute financially to this community. As a graduate student, my income is not astronomical. However, my experience of stepping into the light of community made me want to support what had become so sustaining to me. So I made a small pledge, only what I felt comfortably able. For me, that ongoing donation is a kind of ritual that reaffirms my connection with UUAA despite the geographic distance. So if, like me, you're an under-the-radar member in this community, and especially if you're participating from a distance, I encourage you to consider making a pledge, not only to support the ongoing efforts of this liberal congregation in Ann Arbor, but perhaps also as a meaningful ritual to connect you to this community from wherever you happen to be. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Reagan. Reagan's story beautifully illustrates the exploration of belonging that we are doing today together. And I also want to share another story about belonging. It's about a little creature being named Beekle, and it's called Beekle, make sure I get this correct, The Adventures of Beekle, the Unimaginary Friend. He was born on an island, far away, where imaginary friends were created. Here they lived and played, each eagerly awaiting to be imagined by a real child. Every night he stood under the stars, hoping for his turn to be picked by a child and given a special name. He waited for many nights. But his turn never came. Filled with thoughts of all the amazing things that were keeping his friend from imagining him. So rather than waiting, he did the unimaginable. He sailed through unknown waters and faced many scary things. But thinking about his friend gave him the courage to journey on. Until he reached the real world. The real world was a strange place. No kids were eating cake. No one stopped to hear the music. And everyone needed nap time. Then he finally saw something familiar, so he followed. He had a good feeling about this place, but he looked everywhere and he could not find his friend. He climbed to the top of a tree and looked out, wishing and hoping his friend would come. But no one came. He thought about how far he'd come and how long he'd waited, and felt very sad. Then he heard a noise below. Hello! Her face was friendly and familiar, and there was something about her that felt just right. At first, they weren't sure what to do. Neither of them had made a friend before. But after a little while, they realized they were perfect together. Beekle and Alice had many new adventures. They shared their snacks. They told funny jokes. The world began to feel a little less strange. And together, they did the unimaginable. The end.
Good morning, everyone. As we do each week, let's take a moment to recognize that we each bring gifts to this community. For example, our time as volunteers or our talents as musicians, and as we are able, our financial gifts. Today, these gifts will go towards supporting the ministries and programs of this congregation. I would invite you to use our text to give option by texting UUAA to 73256 and select weekly offering for the fund. You can also visit uuaa.org/giving or place your offering in the baskets at the back of the sanctuary. Thank you so much for your generosity. And now I invite you to rise in body or spirit as we dedicate our offering. Will you join me in our words of dedication? To the work of this congregation, which is weaving a tapestry of love and action, we dedicate our lives and these our offerings. Thank you. Please be seated. And now, as we move deeper into the worship hour, we will spend some time together in a moment of meditation. I invite you to join with me and those around you in a moment of collective breathing. I know that breathing with and through a mask may be challenging, so please don't let this be a source of frustration. The goal of this shared practice is to help increase our connection to one another through breathing in and breathing out. As our trio is singing the meditation on breathing, I invite you to breathe as you are able. Let the music guide your breath. And if you would like to join in motioning with me to indicate your inhalation and exhalation, I would invite you to do so.
Shortly before the shutdown, I was able to officiate at a memorial for a beloved community member. It was a beautiful service, carefully crafted by her devoted husband and involving many people. Of course, none of us knew at the time just how lucky we were to be able to gather in a large group to say goodbye to a loved one. When it was over, I felt the way I feel after every memorial, deeply honored to be part of such a sacred experience, reminded of how precious life is, and in awe of the mystery of life and death. I was also tired. It was getting late, and the introverted side of me needed a break. So I snuck away from the crowd and went back to the kitchen to introduce myself to the caterers and grab a bite to eat. This memorial was catered by a family-run Middle Eastern restaurant, so I was able to sit and talk with some of the family members. A woman, her sister, and the woman's 2 young daughters, who seemed to be around 6 and 8 years old. I quickly noticed that the girls were playing with dolls I recognized from my own daughter, so I asked them which ones they had in the collection. Their large, dark eyes widened, and they gasped, amazed that I knew about these particular dolls. Pretty soon they were telling me their whole life story in rapid fire, talking over each other in a tumble of words the way siblings do. The woman looked at me apologetically and tried to coax them away, but I assured her I was loving it. With that assurance and their mother's permission, they pulled me around the building to show me the various wonders they had discovered, including the mysterious staircase to nowhere. You may have seen it between the social hall and the sanctuary. Of course, I didn't have the heart to tell them it actually goes to a very boring utility room. But we played games back there and talked and laughed for quite a while, until it became clear that people were leaving and the reception was coming to an end. The oldest and most talkative girl, sensing an imminent goodbye, grabbed my hand and said urgently, "Can I tell you a secret?" I said, "Sure," and crouched down to her level. She leaned in, locked eyes with me, and whispered, "I don't have any friends at school." It's a cliche to say that it broke my heart, but sometimes that's the only way to describe that kind of pain. I looked at her and said, "Oh, that is so hard." She nodded from being solemn to bubbling with excitement as she told her mom about our adventures. We all said our goodbyes, and the girls asked if they could come visit our church again. "We love this place," they said breathlessly. "Of course," I answered. "We loved having you here. You will always have friends here." They smiled, and then they were gone. Later, I tried to describe my night to a friend, but I could tell by her reaction that I was failing to convey the power of it all. I couldn't adequately explain the feeling of connection that memorials always bring, or the feeling of recognition I had in that brief moment with the little girl. Because I was once a little girl too, of course, a girl who spent 2 years crying at the prospect of going to school because I couldn't find friends and I was being bullied by a classmate. I knew from that experience and many other life experiences along the way what it felt like not to belong. Then I eventually entered into ministry and was given the gift of being invited into people's stories. And what I quickly discovered is that struggling with belonging is almost universal. Many of us have experienced times of loneliness, even among people we thought we belonged to. Many of us have had the communities or people we felt connected to change or disappear, leaving us feeling unmoored. Many of us have spent our whole lives searching but not quite finding the belonging we're so hungry for. But why is it so common? The reasons are too complex and numerous to list them all, but I think it begins with the fact that we live in a very individualistic culture, a culture that champions independence, autonomy, self-love, self-care, self-determination. And don't get me wrong, these qualities are all very important and healthy, but we also need other people. We are inherently social animals, and the research around how our connections to other people have helped our species survive grows all the time. For example, scientists have discovered that one core piece of early humans' success was the ability of parents to share their childcare duties with other adults, along with countless other cooperative behaviors. A Attachment theory has also shown us that when a child is able to foster a close, secure attachment to at least one parent figure, they're better able to think creatively, feel empowered, and explore the wider world. It's called the Dependency Paradox. The more we're able to depend on key people in our lives, the more independent we can be. And it doesn't stop in childhood. Adult attachment research has shown that our need to depend on others shifts from being just on our caregivers to other key relationships, like romantic relationships, friendships, and communities. Unfortunately, our individualistic culture has combined with many obstacles to make it harder to find relationships that we can depend on. For example, our modern lives, which are often distant from the cycles and rhythms of nature, can sometimes take us away from our basic sense of belonging to the web of life. It also used to be common to live embedded in extended family networks and tight-knit communities, but now many people's friends and family are scattered all across the country or the world, going wherever their jobs and education take them. Some neighborhoods are still close, thankfully, but it's also common for many people to not know all their neighbors. We're lucky to have a strong multi-generational community here at UUAA, but in general, religious communities are slowly dying out as beliefs shift and people's time keeps getting stretched more and more. Social media connects us in many important ways, but as the recent report in the news about Facebook and Instagram remind us, it can also foster increased loneliness, anxiety, and depression, especially among young people. The recent shutdown due to COVID, of course, left many people struggling with loneliness and isolation. But over and over again, I've heard people say that it merely exacerbated the lack of connection they were already feeling before the pandemic. It feels daunting, and sadly, there's no magic wand or a three-point plan that will quickly fix it all. But we can begin to find some healing if we can foster more vulnerability, the ability to be open and honest about how we are feeling, and to be able to listen with compassion to what others are experiencing. As the writer Tokopah Turner points out in her book, Belonging, Remembering Ourselves Home, our modern culture is suffering an epidemic of alienation. Yet so many of us feel alone in our unbelonging, as if everyone else was inside of the thing that we alone are outside of. And keeping silent about our experience of estrangement is, in large part, what allows it to perpetuate. That's why my encounter with the little girl was so powerful for me. In theory, we solved nothing. I could not say or do anything that would give her the friends and sense of belonging that she was looking for. But for just one moment in time, we belonged to each other in our common understanding of that pain. The Buddhist teacher and writer Pema Chodron puts it this way: curiously enough, if we primarily try to shield ourselves from discomfort, we suffer. Yet when we don't close off and we let our hearts break, we discover our kinship with all beings. One strange and delightful example of this truth actually comes from a pop song called Dancing on My Own by Robin. NPR did a wonderful story I highly recommend. It came out a couple of years ago, and it focused on how this song brings people together. I don't want to violate copyright law by playing it, although I wish I could. But for those of you who haven't heard it, I can say that the music is sweet and fun, and it has a beat that makes it almost impossible not to dance along. But the simple words are laced with a kind of pain that doesn't seem to match the bubbly music. It's the story of a young woman who discovers her ex has already moved on and found new love. So even though she knows it's juvenile and painful, she goes to a dance club knowing she'll see them there together. In the chorus, she belts out, and I apologize, I'm not going to sing this. I'm in the corner watching you kiss her. And I'm right over here. Why can't you see me? And I'm giving it my all, but I'm not the girl you're taking home. I keep dancing on my own. It's cathartic, it's silly, it's painful, it's so many feelings at once. But above all, it's vulnerable, which is why this song about being alone brings people together and makes them feel less alone. The NPR story gives many examples of how it's become so significant to people that it's been played at both weddings and at funerals. They talk about how whenever it comes on at clubs or concerts, the whole room will burst out singing, even though it was never a hit on the radio. I actually witnessed this myself when I was dancing with friends, pre-COVID, of course. There's even a video on YouTube of a huge crowd of Robin concert goers waiting on a New York City subway platform who spontaneously burst out singing it together. The joy and connection in that video is palpable. Many of us long for the healing those kinds of moments of belonging can bring. As Tokopah Turner points out, even the word belonging itself contains the phrase, to be longing. But of course, opening our hearts to our own vulnerability and the vulnerability of others is no easy task, especially right now, as we're all feeling so worn down by the endless uncertainty, division, and death that have marked these last 18 months. In our exhaustion, it can be easy to let anxiety and pain come out sideways in the form of complaining, conflict, pettiness, addiction, giving up, or becoming more controlling. I know I've struggled with these kinds of coping mechanisms myself, on top of just general compassion fatigue. But once again, it was a child who guided me back. I was in a store a few weeks ago when a man walked in with his young sons, ranging in age from 5 years old to teenagers. None of them were wearing masks or following any safety protocols, even though it was a very small space and pandemic numbers had been skyrocketing recently. I tried to keep my own children far from this family as I seethed with anger that he was putting everyone in the store, including his own children, at risk. I noticed out of the corner of my eye that the littlest boy kept glancing over at us, but I was too caught up in my own self-righteousness to really register him. Then I had to walk past the family to grab something, and as I turned to walk back, I finally looked at the little boy. He was staring up at me with these giant, beseeching eyes and an earnest smile. I didn't know his story, but I instantly recognized the face of someone who desperately wants to be seen and loved. My anger disappeared, and I found myself smiling as hard as I could with my eyes, since my mask was covering my face. And I tried to pour out all of my love as I walked by. And in that moment, I watched his face relax with relief. Those few sacred moments once again reminded me that on some level, we are all that child. A child with shining eyes who just wants to be seen, who just wants to belong. For some of us, that childlike vulnerability lives just below the surface, easily accessible. And for others, it's buried deep, deep beneath many layers of pain. But when we have the courage to let it show, or to give others the space to show their vulnerability, we are instantly returned to our greater belonging. This is especially true here in this community, where we are committed to fostering a sense of belonging with one another and with the web of life. Here, we can take time to engage in practices, both big and small, that make all the difference. Practices like showing up in person or online again and again for each other each week. Or sharing openly how we're really doing and listening carefully when others share their stories. Offering one another a card or a ride or a meal during hard times. Or even just smiling warmly with our eyes as we pass in the hall. We won't do it perfectly or always, but every moment together is a chance to try again. to cultivate more belonging and find more belonging. May we keep trying. May we keep healing. May we keep dancing on our own together. May it be so. I invite you to rise now in body or spirit. Let us go forth into the coming week. And as we do, may we find the courage we need to open our hearts, even if just a little bit more than we could before. Let us find rest and healing in the places where we feel belonging. And let us be a place of belonging for so many who need it. May it be so, and blessed be.